Hi guys, it's Jess from Honest Fiction and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. So I recently heard that there was a new book coming out that's centered around true crime podcasts. Personally, I am obsessed with true crime. If I'm not listening to an audiobook, I'm normally listening to some sort of mystery or true crime podcast. So for this video, I'm going to be reviewing If I Disappear by Eliza Jane Brazier, and then followed up with some of my favorite true crime podcast recommendations. I hope you guys enjoy. Okay, so like I said in the opener, I'm going to be doing a very brief, spoiler-free review of this book, followed by my favorite true crime podcast. So, jumping into the plot of If I Disappear, it follows Sarah, who is going through a divorce, or she's already divorced. Trigger warning, she lost a baby, she had a miscarriage, and she's just really depressed. And the only thing that's really getting her through is this podcast, true crime podcast, called Murderish, She Spoke. And she is just laying in bed every day listening to this podcast until suddenly Rachel, the narrator of this podcast, disappears. And Sarah decides that she's going to find out what happened to Rachel. So how she does this is she goes to where Rachel was residing, goes pretty much undercover, and goes in the middle of nowhere at this ranch and tries to track down what happened to Rachel. She meets Rachel's family, friends, and it really goes from there. So I was not a fan of this book. I felt like it was it's not long, but the pacing was so slow. I did not get gripped into this book until the very end. And every time I put the book down, I just didn't have any urge to pick it back up. So also the main character, Sarah, reminded me a little bit in the beginning of Amelia from Amelia Oliphant is Completely Fine. I believe that's the title. I'll leave the actual title and the author down below. But unlike in Amelia Oliphant is Completely Fine, like I fall in love with that character. It's also a character that's very depressed, but she kind of finds herself. I feel like Sarah, it was just kind of grating to listen to. There is some feminist undertones in this book. However, I'm all for feminism, but Sarah, the main character, was just really hating on this one character, Clementine, simply for the fact that she is a woman who decided to settle down and have kids. And I feel like Sarah really hates on any woman that decides to do that. And that was just really frustrating. I did not like following and being in Sarah's head. And yeah, the whole ending was enjoyable, but it just didn't make up for the rest of the book, unfortunately. I overall was just not a huge fan. But I also feel like that has a lot to do with my expectations of this book were so high. I was so excited going into it. So that is probably why. But yeah, overall, didn't love the book. But now jumping into podcasts that I do absolutely love. So here are my podcast recommendations. The first podcast I'm going to talk about is my absolute favorite, and that is My Favorite Murder by Georgia Hardstark and Karen Kilgariff. And I love them. They are two women and they are both comedians. So it is a comedy true crime podcast, which is pretty different. I think this is probably one of the most popular true crime podcasts there is. I will say the first, it's really broken up into like two parts. And the first part is really just the two women talking and catching up. It really feels like you're just chatting with friends. And the second part, they dive into the crime. It is not super detailed. They really don't show like 911 calls or anything like that. It's not too gruesome. So if you're kind of a newbie to true crime, I would recommend checking them out. They do use vulgar language. This is not intended for children, so just keep that in mind. But overall, it's a really enjoyable podcast. The next podcast is called Crime Junkies, and it was actually the first podcast that I found that was true crime based. And it is by Ashley Flowers and Britt, and I don't know if Britt ever says her last name. If she does, I will link it. I will tell you guys down below. But this one is much more detailed. These girls really do their research. They have everything about the crime. Unlike My Favorite Murder, they really just jump right into the crime. I think it's about an hour long, full of details. I learned so much by listening to their podcast. If I watch a true crime documentary, I'm like, oh yeah, that's a family annihilator, or that's like whatever. Like they really do tell you give you a lot of information. So I found them really enjoyable. I was supposed to see them live last summer, but quarantine. So hopefully when all of this is over, I will get to see them. I was so excited for that, but what can you do? And the last podcast I'm going to talk about is Murderish by Jamie Rice. And this one I really enjoy because while Crime Junkies and My Favorite Murder really talk more about popular true crimes, these people do more crimes that kind of fly under the radar that I've never heard of and aren't in the media as much, which I really enjoyed. The one thing I'm not crazy about with Murderish is the narrator's voice sometimes comes off a little bit robotic. I've seen her do interviews and it doesn't come off that way, so I'm not sure if that's something that happens in editing with the podcast or what, but that's completely personal preference. I think that all of the podcasts she has done have been super interesting and definitely worth checking out if you like true crime. I will say she does not hold back on the details. It can get really gory, so definitely be prepared for that before jumping in. She does do a really good job of kind of giving you trigger warnings, so that definitely helps. All right, guys, that's it for my video. Thank you for listening to my review and my podcast recommendations. If you guys have any recommendations for true crime books or podcasts, please let me know in the comments. I'm always looking for more true crime content. But all right, if you don't know yet, I post new videos every Tuesday and Sunday. And if you haven't yet, please like and subscribe to my channel. I'll see you guys next week.